thanks a lot, both of you, for agreeing to do this. We're going to try to keep to the usual kind of schedule that we would do if we were in person. So we're going to give each of you an opportunity to make an opening statement. We'll give you 3 minutes for that. Then I'm going to pose questions. Some of them will be just general questions to both of you. You'll each have 2 minutes to answer. Some of them will be questions to one or the other of you. I'll give you 2 minutes to answer. Then we'll go back and forth a couple of times, 1 minute each. Yvonne is going to be the timekeeper, although he may also pose a couple of questions. And depending on the answers that you give or the lack of answers that you give, I may ask follow-up questions. I'm going to do my best to alternate back and forth.
I've heard that before.
And if I screw it up, I'm sorry. It's not because I have any ulterior motives. It's simply that I can't keep track. So, and I think you both know me well enough to know that to be true.
Indeed.
And at the conclusion, I'll give you each 2 minutes to deliver your closing statement. So because we're doing it this way, virtually, instead of having you sitting at us, I'm going to go in alphabetical order. So Mark, I'm going to let you deliver your opening statement first.
Who closes first and last, by a reverse alphabetical order, or is that, did you decide that already?
Really, are you going to confuse me already?
I'm happy to. I have spent every day of my adult life in dedicated service to my community. I have tried to make government function for people from the day I was mayor of Tivoli to the last 2.5 years as county executive. I have worked with everyone and anyone who's honest and earnest about solving problems. And over the course of my public service career, I can tell you that I have seen too many families torn apart by high taxes and regulation, forcing friends and neighbors off to other states. I have seen government ignore upstate communities, small businesses, family farms. I have seen over the course of now 29 years of public service, far too many shuttered doors and far too many families struggling too hard. I know it because I lived it. Even today, as I travel around this district, and frankly, we've been to every county 3 or 4 times since announcing I wanted to represent the people of the 19th Congressional District. I see it in the faces of families all across the 19th District. There is anguish, there is concern, there is fear, and it is exactly the face I saw and the emotion I saw in my mom years ago when she, as a single mom, raised 2 boys. Food stamps helped us along the way and struggled really hard. I'm running for Congress because I want government to function again. I'm running for Congress because I believe in the people of this district. I know that we can solve problems if we set aside our differences, listen to one another, learn from one another, and confront the challenges that face us head on. That means controlling spending. It means reducing the burden of taxation. It means lifting up small businesses and giving opportunity to family farms to thrive and survive in upstate New York. It means confronting the fact that there are too many who struggle with mental illness, like my mother did. There are too many living with intellectual and developmental disabilities who are left without services and support because their government doesn't necessarily care about them. And there are far too many who struggle with substance use disorder and the plague of opioids and addiction without access to service. My entire life, and I do not apologize for it, has been about trying to make government function for people. I want Congress and Washington to function for the people of upstate New York. There are far too many times that government overlooks, ignores, or pits people against one another. I promise you this, if given the honor of serving in the House of Representatives, my goal, my job will be, just as it was as a mayor and as a state legislator, to listen to the people we serve, to reflect and represent your interests, and to try to mold some consensus towards solving problems, confronting inflation, confronting the cost of living, providing services and support, ensuring there's adequate access to education for our kids. Every day, if given this opportunity, and this honor, I'm going to work hard to represent the people of the 19th Congressional District because I've lived it. I've worked with every community and every community leader, in particular over these last 2 years, working with Republicans and Democrats alike to confront the challenges that face us. We've done it here locally, and I'd like to do it on your behalf as your representative in Congress.
Thank you. Pat?
Thanks for having us, albeit virtually. And Mark, thank you for being here. I'm looking forward to the discussion. Well, I'm running for Congress because I believe the entire essence and fabric of our democracy is under threat and increasingly under attack by extremist folks who want to take away foundational freedoms that I took an oath to defend, freedoms that I risked my life to protect and defend. I was born and raised in this community here in Kingston, where I'm sitting today. And from a very early age, my parents imbued in me a sense of service, of being of service, and of taking care of others, and especially those most vulnerable, and not leaving anyone behind. And that sense of service is what led me to West Point. It's what guided me through 2 combat deployments in Iraq over 27 months. It's what inspired me to start a small business, grow it to over 150 employees, and try to get better hardware and software to our troops in harm's way across the globe. And it's certainly what's inspired and powered me through some incredibly tough years here as county executive during a once-in-a-century pandemic, trying to get our community through and keep us all together. And I think at the end of the day, what's clear is we've got plenty of career politicians in Washington. What we're missing are real leaders with a backbone, leaders who have put their life on the line for our country, who built successful businesses, who brought people together in difficult and trying times, and ultimately leaders who've actually delivered results. The very first thing I learned on the very first day as a cadet at West Point is there are only 3 acceptable answers to any question. Yes, sir, ma'am. No, sir, ma'am. No excuse, sir or ma'am. And all we're hearing from Washington, not just for the last few years, but for decades, is excuses as we fail to deliver. And at the local government level, I have shown and proven the ability to deliver. So ultimately, I'm running to deliver for this community that has had my back, and to do 2 things at once. One, fight to protect and defend core foundational freedoms enshrined in our Constitution and our founding documents, including explicitly the right for a woman to choose, the right for access to abortions and reproductive health care, to not have the government tell you what to do with your body or about a existential personal health decision, the right for free and fair elections, the right for clean air, soil, and water, the right to not worry about dropping off my kids at daycare or bring them to a 4th of July parade and think that they're going to be gunned down. The other thing that I'm fighting for and have delivered on as county executive is addressing the huge economic pain that folks are feeling. And I know we'll talk more about that, but I am so honored to have this opportunity to continue to serve this community as a member of Congress.
Okay, thank you. So this is going to be a question to both of you. This is an election season, the likes of which we've never seen before, right? The 2 of you are running in 2 races simultaneously, one against each other and one against opponents in some cases that have yet to be determined, to represent different districts, the same districts, different numbers. It's just a confusing time, right? So each of you have been criticized for, as county executives, for what some would say abandoning those you now represent because you're running for a position knowing you're going to have to give up the position of county executive. How do you respond to that accusation? And Pat, you go first.
Well, I think stepping up to serve in a different way is the opposite of that. I think it's saying we have national, federal challenges in front of us, direct threats to our democracy and our core freedoms, as the far right of the Republican Party tries to rip away rights that I fought to defend and generations before me and folks have protested and rallied to earn and to endure. So at a moment like this, it is an all hands on deck moment for our democracy. And so I certainly feel that call to step up and defend and protect those rights and freedoms, and also to use what I've learned and proven and delivered here at the local government level to fix the dysfunction and show the ability to deliver in Washington. For example, the way that we in Ulster County used and leveraged the federal American Rescue Plan funds that now Lieutenant Governor Delgado and the Congress fought so hard to deliver for us, reinvesting in desperately needed mental health and addiction recovery services, reinstating our mental health department, increasing funding there, providing millions of dollars in small business relief, investing in infrastructure, protecting our environment, all, by the way, while never raising taxes, as opposed to my opponent who's raised taxes consistently in every office that he's held. So this is an opportunity to really step up and provide even more service to this community. And to be clear about the districts and all the lines, the way that I think we all understand this is we run to represent our home. And although the lines are changing, I am not moving my family. We live in Gardiner, we will stay in Gardiner. That's in the old 19th and the new 18th district. It's also where I was born and raised in Kingston, where I graduated Kingston High School, where I graduated West Point. And this community has had my back at every step, and I will have theirs at every step.
Thank you. Mark?
The voters ought to be confused. On August 23rd, they're going to receive 2 ballots. And on both of those ballots, Pat Ryan's name will appear. One in a primary for the 18th district and the other in the special election for the 19th district, in which we both live. It is confusing. It's confusing because Democrats in Albany went unchecked and gerrymandered the state of New York to an unconstitutional crisis. We stood up for that. We made it perfectly clear that gerrymandering for partisan benefit is inexcusable. It's why in Dutchess County, we implemented the most independent redistricting process in the state of New York. It's why, by the way, we established term limits for county elected officials. And it's why we now have the most comprehensive ethics law of any county in the state. I've given my life to this community. And for the last 11 years, we've delivered results for Dutchess County residents. We lead the state in mental health services and substance use disorder. We led in criminal justice reform before people were willing to talk about it. We've invested in trauma-informed care and support for those with disabilities. We have not only invested in infrastructure and parks, but with all due respect, we have cut taxes. In fact, we tax less today in Dutchess County than when I took office, and we have consistently provided, when we can, the opportunity to return taxpayer dollars. In fact, this year, the largest property tax cut in county history, $5.2 million. We cut our sales tax, the only county in the region to do so, $14.5 million in tax relief, and we were the first to cap and cut the gas tax, another $5 million in tax relief. The difference between us is that when we can give people their money back, we do. And when we can't, I explain why. With massive surpluses, we chose to return taxpayer money to taxpayers. That's unique in government, certainly in Washington. I'm running because at this very moment, and I saw it for the last 2 years, government, one-party rule in Washington and Albany ignores any difference of opinion. It overrides those with whom it disagrees. Washington and Albany have been arrogant, and in fact, during the pandemic, chose to ignore humans, those with substance use disorder, mental health concerns, those with disabilities, our kids, seniors whose lives were threatened. We saw government overreach. I'm running at this important moment because I believe the district, the residents and the communities of upstate New York deserve somebody who is going to leverage every resource, every experience, and every relationship on their behalf to deliver real results, just as I have done every day of my adult life.
Mark, why should the people of Dutchess County, though, vote for you now when you're running in a district in November that you won't represent them? And that you don't live in, by the way.
Fair enough. Redistricting causes a lot of that to occur all across the country. I'm not the only. There are actually quite a number of Democrats and Republicans who have been left in this position. On August 23rd, I'm asking the residents of the 19th Congressional District to give me the honor of representing them. There is no guarantee in November that either of us is elected or reelected, or even, by the way, employed. And so the residents of the new 19th District in November will have to make that decision. But right now, we don't have a voice. Right now, Joe Biden, the Democrats in Washington, Kathy Hochul, the Democrats in Albany, they have been making decisions that are making us more expensive and less safe. All I suggest is it is okay for the communities, the families, the farmers of upstate New York, including the residents of Dutchess County, to present someone who will act independently, despite the argument otherwise, who will work to bridge a divide and speak on behalf of constituents. Here's the other thing. On August 23rd, I am committed to the 19th Congressional District. We need a representative not only in Washington, but someone who will marshal resources here locally to assist constituents, the issues that face people every single day, to advocate for them. On August 23rd, I will commit and remain committed to the people of the 19th Congressional District to deliver that kind of service. I'm not going anywhere. And so I ask for those that I work for today for their support. And in November, we're going to have to make another case to the new districts. That is entirely legitimate and appropriate. And I respect the fact that currently we have no representative in upstate New York, and these communities and the residents we hope to serve deserve a voice. And I hope and ask that it be me.
Pat, for in your instance, you'll be running, like Mark, in a district that looks different in November than the one that exists now. Why should the people in Greene County, for example, or Columbia County, give you their vote when potentially come January 1st, you won't be representing them anyway?
Yeah, I think this is clearly unusual and non-ideal for a whole bunch of folks. And I want to point out, though, what my opponent just did there, which is—
It's Mark. You can call me Mark, Pat.
Okay, what Mark just did there, which is not answer your question, number one, and earlier point out and cast blame at the whole process on Democrats, but then fail to say that he's exploiting that to literally abandon Dutchess County, where your home is, Mark, where you're elected right now, for your own political expediency to run in a different district that does not at all include that area. That is very different than me, which lives at 8 Guilford Schoolhouse Road in Gardiner, New York, which currently is in the old 19th, and in November will be in the new 18th. I am not uprooting my family or my life or abandoning my county. And I think that's absolutely critical that that distinction be made clear. In terms of showing up and working hard, that's how I've approached every job, from an Army officer to a small business leader. My first weeks and months as county executive, held 20 town halls in 20 towns in 20 weeks, and continue to take that same approach in this campaign, and will certainly do so in Congress. And so working hard to earn that support and to show up and listen is core to my ethos as a leader throughout my life.
So I know that we're allowed a little bit of a rebuttal. I would offer that, Pat, you didn't answer the question either. On August 23rd, the residents of the 19th Congressional District will have a representative, if it's me, committed to the residents of the 19th Congressional District. I understand the changes in the district, but on August 23rd, if Pat Ryan is elected to represent this district, he is going to immediately become a candidate in a district that is overwhelmingly not the 19th District, Dutchess, Orange, and Putnam counties. There is no one on earth who thinks that you are going to not spend a great deal of time campaigning in the new 18th district. And by the way, if the last 5 weeks have been any example, the truth is you've been campaigning in the 18th Congressional District almost exclusively. I made a commitment to the residents and the communities of this district. It would have been easy to simply abandon all of them and return now to the 19th Congressional, the 18th, what will be the 18th Congressional District. I have seen it. I traveled the state as a candidate for governor. I have seen communities abandoned by politicians, by the way, most of whom Democrats statewide, who just turned their back on upstate. I wasn't willing to do it. It was a thoughtful and very hard decision for my wife and I, but we made that commitment. I made the commitment because I believe in the district and frankly have served this community and these communities for the last nearly 25 years.
Do I have an opportunity here?
You can get 1 minute.
Since Mark just inserted himself.
1 minute, yeah.
Again, I think
1 minute back and forth. That's not insert myself. Thank you, though.
Okay, we can start my timer now then. Look, I think it is classic move of someone who's literally been in elected office since they were a teenager to deceive, to get tricky with the numbers rather than getting to the heart of the issue, which is you are uprooting your family. And I understand that's I'm sure a very hard decision, one that my wife certainly would not sign on to, I can tell you that much. And you're doing it because it's a more politically expedient district. And I don't know how you look at the residents of Dutchess County to tell them that. I don't know where you're going to be living, But I think that this is an issue, to be clear, that you've created an issue around at the beginning of the campaign. I think my approach in life is these decisions were made certainly above all of our pay grades, certainly above mine. I make the best of the circumstances as they are, rather than being cynical and deceptive and trying to confuse voters, which is very concerning.
You know, I do want to ask this question though, Mark, of you. Again, why, and there has been this criticism, why should Dutchess County residents who have supported you your entire political career, from the time that you were elected as a village trustee in, you know, Tivoli, mayor, county legislator, assemblyman, county executive, they've supported you every step of the way, and now, sorry, I'm not going to represent you.
With all due respect, Pat, and I say to both Pats, that's a question that's worthy of being answered. To suggest that the fact that Pat Ryan's on 2 ballots in 2 different districts on the same day isn't a question, it is.
Mark, you are as well.
No, I'm not. I'm not on 2 ballots. You're on 2
You don't have a primary opponent. That's
yes, in the
nothing to do with
18th
you.
Congressional District. Yes, you are on 2 ballots. Are we even now in breaking into people's time? You are on 2 separate ballots on the same day. I've given 12 years to Dutchess County. I love this community. But you also said it, Pat. I served in the state assembly. And for 6 years, I represented Dutchess and Columbia counties. You come from Red Hook, Patricia. You know that our economy, our social circles, our culture is shared in northeast Ulster. It is shared in Columbia County. And the joke has always been Tivoli is a suburb of Germantown. The truth of the matter is I represented Dutchess and Columbia counties ably for 6 years in the state legislature. I don't apologize for my desire to commit in public service, but I have served 11 years as county executive. My time is done by my own choice. I have chosen to term limit myself. With all due respect, Pat, you're in your second and a half year. That's a bit of an abandonment. We have achieved what I set out to achieve as county executive, and I don't believe I should serve a day longer than 12 years. That is something that I believe in. It's the reason we established term limits for county-wide elected officials. And to the point, on August 23rd, I intend to represent the people of the 19th Congressional District. And then in November, we will both have to make our case to the voters of that district. And the voters of the 19th Congressional District in November will have to determine whether or not they think I am appropriate to represent them. But should I be representing this district on August 24th, I am going to commit to the communities of this district, 85% of which remain in the new 19th Congressional District and need a voice today.
Pat, if you want to respond, if not, I'm going to move on to my next question.
I mean, I think this is not what voters really care about. They care about our plans to deliver on issues. All I'll just say is Mark started by saying that's a question worth answering. He didn't actually answer. But just like his refusal to answer questions about existential issues in our country, like a woman's right to choose, like gun violence and what we're going to do about that. So let's see the rest.
We're going to talk about that today.
That's,
as a matter of fact, Mark, I think
time for that.
I think you're up first for the next question, right? Pat had the first question. Mark, as your opponent mentioned, abortion has emerged as a significant issue for voters across the country. You've described yourself as pro-life.
True.
Will you support efforts to pass a federal ban on abortion?
I don't believe that after the Supreme Court decision that the federal government or Congress has much of a role at all. And that is, in fact, the decision of the Supreme Court. I have always said this, and I am personally pro-life. Like most Americans, however, I have accepted that the law has provided access to what is a very sensitive and difficult decision for women. I understand it. My mother brought into this world a child with a severe birth defect. I saw what it looks like to lose your child after birth, and my mother struggled with it every day since. If she had adequate access to neonatal and prenatal care, I don't know what her choice would have been. But I know how difficult it was to try to bring a child into the world with a disability and lose that child early in life. Like most Americans, I accepted that that was the law. The Supreme Court has decided otherwise. But what they did do is require now the states to make those decisions. And in this state, the right to access is basically without limit. Like most Americans, I think there ought to be thoughtful limitations. I do happen to believe that late-term abortion needs to be scaled to the necessity only. I think that we ought to be talking about what we value in life and what we value about life. There is a difference between Pat and me. I believe there ought to be thoughtful limitations. He doesn't, and I understand why. You know, there's a long time ago, Bill Clinton used to say safe, rare, and legal. Today, there just seems to be no willingness to talk about when it is appropriate to respect that emerging life. And I understand that women need to make that decision. And in this state, access will be protected. I do not believe there is a role for Congress under the new Supreme Court, the Dobbs decision. I firmly believe that constitutionally. And I also believe that we as a society need to invest more in prenatal, neonatal, access to contraception. I sponsored over-the-counter Plan B when I was a member of the state assembly and voted for it. I believe that there needs to be support for families who wish to bring individuals' lives with disabilities into the world. I believe there needs to be support for men and families and women who want to adopt. But we should be having a sensitive conversation at this moment. I understand what this does to upend what we thought was the rule of law, what we thought was the law of the land. But in this very moment, I want us to have a serious conversation about how we ensure access, how we ensure care, and how we ensure a conversation about the value of life and what we value in life. And again, that's my view. It's been my view. And I've stated, I'm sorry I didn't state it within the hour and a half the Daily Freeman asked, or 3 hours the Daily Freeman asked. I was in Schoharie County, but I've said it every day since, despite Pat's protestation otherwise.
I just want to follow up on that question though. So conversely, does that mean that you would also not support the legislation that's pending in Congress now, the Women's Health Protection Act?
I believe, again, that Congress's role and the federal government's role has been severely limited by the Supreme Court decision. And therefore, it is now an issue that returns to the state governments. We may not agree that we like that, but that is the way in which this constitutional democracy functions. And now states make those choices. But I will also say this, and this will be the only time I'll ever quote her, but even Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez says, and I think understandably, that even Congress acting will likely not withstand a Supreme Court challenge because, again, the court has returned this matter to state governments. Only a constitutional amendment might withstand it. And so, again, I think the reality is the role of the federal government is severely limited. The states now have the right to make this determination as a healthcare matter within their states, as states generally do with healthcare matters. And I think that we ought to ensure that there's support for women in this state who choose to move forward with an abortion. I believe there ought to be support for those who choose to bring life into the world. And as I've said consistently, like most people of this district, I just think there ought to be some thoughtful limitations.
Pat, do you have any comment on that, or do you want to move forward?
I have lots of comments and questions. I mean, unless I missed something, he again didn't answer your question, which is your party, the increasingly far-right extremist Republican Party, led by Kevin McCarthy, who endorsed you, and Elise Stefanik, who endorsed you, are loudly, proudly calling for a national ban on abortion. That is on the table, and the only specific answer I've heard that you gave was to the Freeman weeks ago when you said, I will not entertain hypothetical questions. This is not hypothetical. This is real and human and visceral. I cannot tell you the number of times on the campaign trail across this district, in the most rural and suburban parts of this district, people have literally broken into tears in response to fundamental rights being ripped away by your party and the far-right Republican Party that is increasingly clearly, looking at Kansas just a few days ago as an example, disconnected from reality on the ground. So one, I'd like to ask, will you specifically oppose that ban?
I just said it, Pat. She asked me, would you oppose a ban? I said, would you vote for a ban? My position is I do not believe the federal government has the right to establish a restriction.
That's not the question. You're getting tricky, as you always try to do.
I don't always try to do it, and it is consistent.
I think that the question is that I asked, was it a yes or no question? No, Mark?
And I said, no. You asked me, would you support a nationwide ban? I said, no. I believe that the Supreme Court has limited the authority of the federal government to act. And beyond that, well, it's Pat's time, so I won't step on any more of it. But I've answered that question, and I'm very
clear here.
What's clear here is that you believe, and by the way, there are extremes on your side of the aisle as well, that believe, by the way, that abortion should be limitless. And if a child happens, if there's an abortion that goes awry, what then? Are you okay, Pat, with no limitations? None? You think that even to the second before delivery, you are okay with abortion? Do you think that there should be at least a moment?
Here's what I think, if you'll let me actually have the time that I'm allowed in this discussion.
You asked me a question, I answered it.
Right, and then continue to talk. And here's the thing. What you're saying to millions of Americans is you have a role. You're going to get in there. You're going to get in there and tell them what decision they should make or not. What I believe, and what I think the vast preponderance of Americans who believe in freedom and privacy as enshrined in our Constitution believe, is that government, especially a bunch of men, have no place in making those decisions. And that is the exact opposite of what, again, the Supreme Court decision just put in place, and what your party and those specific people who you've proudly campaigned with and taken endorsement from stand for. So you got to pick one way or the other. And again,
and I expressed my view. I did.
Okay, you're going to interrupt me again?
Well, we now have to move on to the next topic.
Pat, the economy is tanked and inflation is running rampant under Democratic leaders. Why should voters elect another Democrat to Congress? And what would you do? What would you bring to the table to address this economic downturn that has everybody in its grips?
Yeah, look, I think we all recognize, all of us on the ground working to push against it, and have been for years, myself included, that the economic pain and pressure is near unprecedented. And this has been building for years on housing costs, healthcare costs, prescription drug costs. Certainly now we're seeing it at gas stores and grocery stores. So the question is, who has an actual solution? Who has a track record of addressing it? And that's exactly what I've done as county executive, cutting our gas tax by 50% to provide relief at the pump. And by the way, going against many members of my own party who didn't want to do it, to build bipartisan consensus to put it into place, providing millions of dollars in small business relief, as our small businesses, largely thanks to Republicans who sell out to major multinational big corporations, our small businesses, 90+% of our businesses are under tremendous pressure. So providing relief to them. And again, hammering home the biggest effect that the county can have on folks' pocketbooks, property taxes, having never raised taxes. Marc, going back to all of his positions, has consistently shown the ability to not only raise taxes, but add to the debt. So we can do both things. We can invest in people and we can be financially responsible. That's what I've done as county executive. That's what I'll do in Congress.
Marc, I'm sorry if I can just follow up for a second. You talk about what you've done at the county level, but the fact of the matter is, as county executive, you're a bit of a big fish in a little pond. In Congress, you're not going to be that big fish. You're going to be a little fish in a very big pond. The Democrats have presided over this incredible economic downturn, and there doesn't seem to be. We just got a jobs report today, and although the jobs report looked really good, it also had some pretty dire news to go along with it. Why should the voters again put another Democrat in office when this is what, at least in some voters' minds, this is what the Democrats have wrought?
Look, I think this has been building for years across multiple administrations in this country, and largely because we have let corporate power and corporate greed screw over the vast preponderance of Americans, and that has been enabled almost exclusively by the Republican Party, bought and paid for by big corporate donors who come in, and rather than allowing us to level the playing field for especially rural and suburban areas and small businesses, keep giving mega tax breaks to big corporations. Think about this. In the last Republican administration, while more Americans were seeing their taxes, their individual taxes go up, corporate taxes were dramatically cut. You've got the head of Amazon literally paying zero taxes thanks to the Republican administration that put in that tax code. So there's plenty of blame to go around in Washington. We need people who've actually proven the ability to break through that and deliver solutions. And certainly I'll be, one of many, but that doesn't mean I won't fight like hell. And I'm confident that I can deliver at the federal level on this as well.
Mark?
Listen, Democrats in Washington and Albany have consistently spent money they don't have and overtaxed all of us. It is consistent. New York and this district shoulders the highest burden of taxation of any people in the country. We lead the nation in outmigration of any state in America because of overregulation and high taxation. The Democrats have led Washington, D.C. for the last 2 years. It is overspending. It is weakening the American dollar, and it is overregulation of small businesses and farmers in particular that has led to the historic inflation we're dealing with. You pointed to a jobs report. We are just today now, based on that jobs report, back to the number of jobs we had prior to the pandemic, just today. Real wage growth is on the decline. I've lived it. I apologize that I've been apparently around a little bit longer, but I saw it when my dad lost his job at IBM. I saw the last massive economic correction, thousands upon thousands of jobs lost. What I will be is a check to Washington, D.C. The single party rule that consistently decides to spend money it doesn't have and tax people beyond their ability to pay. For instance, whether it is in Washington or it is in Albany, the new regulation placed on upstate family farms is decimating farming in upstate New York. We are seeing the decline of agriculture because of the high cost of energy, high cost of fertilizers, high cost of labor. The same, the federal government only 4 years ago decided that it was going to arbitrarily raise the energy rates of upstate New Yorkers just to subsidize downstate. There's only one county that sued the federal government. It's Dutchess. And by the way, it was during both Democrat and Republican administrations. It is easy to say that you won't be a rubber stamp to what is in Albany, but clearly, in Washington, but clearly you will be. We need a check and balance. There are enough downstate Democrats in representing New York State. There are enough Democrats in the House of Representatives. That's not going to change. It'll remain a majority. I seek to represent the people who are struggling too hard, and I've lived it. I've lived it as a kid. I've lived it as a child. I saw it, and I've lived it as a public official. And we've delivered. We've delivered tax cuts. We've delivered a responsible government. And I will demand that Washington does the same. Every dollar approved should be weighed not against how much it's going to cost the government, but how much it's going to cost the taxpayers. Adopt an inflation metric so that every time they approve something, every time, you can explain to farmers, families, and small businesses how that's going to affect their bottom line. And if you can't, don't vote for it. Pat's already endorsed the $700 billion expenditure that isn't going to drive down inflation.
Pat, do you want to respond to that?
There were a bunch of pieces
1 minute.
there. I'd like to start by asking a question though, and maybe if you feel bringing this into the next question is appropriate. I agree that every dollar should be spent and accounted for. And Mark, I'd like to hear you talk about your $80,000 personal SUV that you continue to crash and how you explain that to taxpayers when that's the household income annually in your county. In regards to the Inflation Reduction Act, which you were referring to, that is legislation that I do support, which will bring down inflation, which will lower costs, which will also get at many of the climate issues that we're facing, and is going to be another piece of historic legislation passed to provide relief to Americans at a time of unprecedented pressure.
I wouldn't mind a minute, Pat.
Okay.
The act that you're referring to, you endorsed before it was even drafted. Here's a thing I learned in Albany. Don't vote on something you haven't read because you don't know the details. An army of IRS agents, $30 billion in deficit reduction 5 years from now. That is what they point to in driving down inflation. $30 billion in deficit reduction 3 to 5 years from now will not drive down inflation. And my granddad used to say, nobody lives in the long term. They live in the here and now. The reason we are here is because Washington, D.C. spent too much money. It spent more money than it had, and it drove up demand while not being able to keep pace with supply. Farmers today are looking at 300% and 400% increase in input costs that will become the burden on taxpayers and consumers and them next year. The decisions that Washington has made is in their view, in order to get out of inflation driven by massive spending, is to continue spending and shift taxation onto ordinary individuals. In fact, that plan suggests as much as $17 billion in new taxation on families making under $200,000 a year.
I'd like to respond to that specific point because it's absolutely incorrect. And Mark, I don't need to be lectured by you, by the way, on how to do my job and how to read bills or not, because it's clear that what you're reading and referring to are a bunch of Republican talking points from your buddies McCarthy and Stefanik, just like all the other talking points you've been putting out. The Inflation Reduction Act, two of the core principles, one, address the increased deficits under the Trump and Republican administrations and bring them down. Democrats bringing down deficits. And again, you've consistently added to the deficit in your Dutchess County government over time, and the numbers back that up.
No.
But number two, and 100% unequivocally false and deceptive statement that I want to correct, about who pays the burden. The Inflation Reduction Act increases corporate tax rates, which have been pathetically low under the plans put forth by Republicans. 5 different secretaries of the Treasury from both Republican and Democratic administrations have confirmed and verified that no one making less than $400,000 would pay a cent more in any taxes under the Inflation Reduction Act. And I just think that's critical for the American people to understand.
You know, I actually had a couple other topics that I wanted to hit, but I'm going to skip over those and go to this. Over the course of your overlapping tenures as county executives, the two of you have stood together on any number of issues, from COVID-19 to fighting the DEP over discharges from the Esopus into the Hudson and to keep Castle Point open. However, and I think that the last 45 minutes has shown that we're getting increasingly negative toward one another. Negative ads, you're sort of back and forth at each other with negative attacks, and I wonder, why should voters believe that either of you will behave any differently if elected to Congress to break the gridlock and the polarization that is now sort of got a gridlock on Congress, has led to really partisan, I mean, I don't even know what other word to use, but polarization. Why should people think, listening to you and seeing your ads, that it's going to be any different if either one of you get into office? And I don't know, I'm lost.
I'm happy to go first, but I don't want to.
I think it's Mark first. I think, Pat, I asked you about the economy, so I think it's Mark first.
We do have to dissect the difference between the things that we put out from our campaigns and the things that Pat and I both acknowledged, both before getting into this race and today, that third parties do. And frankly, I've never thought this was a great way to run an election, meaning allowing independent third parties to do whatever they want it just undermines. What I will say is this: I don't attack Pat for his conviction, his service. I don't attack Pat for his choice of career, for his service to our community. But I will say out of the bat, and that was today, and out of the gate today and otherwise, simply to cast my service aside because it doesn't fit with his view of public service is just wrong. I like Pat Ryan. We've had a great relationship. In fact, during the pandemic, he knows and I know we relied on one another. As president of the County Executives Association, I had to work with Republicans and Democrats to marshal together all of us in a way that kept us pushing back when we needed to, Albany, working with Albany when we needed to. I have spent every day of my adult life advocating for the people I represent. You know, Tivoli isn't known for being a conservative place, and neither is Dutchess. I have pushed back against Republicans and Democrats in Albany and Washington when it makes sense. I've worked with them. I've worked with members of Congress, regardless of party. I worked with Jerry Solomon and Maurice Hinchey to establish the Hudson River as a heritage river. My entire life has been committed to trying to work with people regardless of party. I don't give orders. I don't accept orders. I simply do what I think is best for the people that I serve with. And I'm hopeful that the relationship Pat Ryan and I enjoyed prior to August 23rd will continue. Although, yes, I do feel in some instances, respectfully, and I think Pat knows this, that, you know, there's a line that we both should probably keep from crossing. And at the end of the day, look forward to serving with County Executive Pat Ryan as his representative in Congress for a few brief moments.
Pat, same question to you. I mean,
Sure,
it's just,
sure.
we hear
Yeah,
it
look,
back and forth.
I mean, this is a time in our country where it's a really dark time, and we have to be able to have spirited and passionate disagreement and debate. And I think you certainly hear that from both of us. And I think it's because we're passionate and we believe in this. And I certainly don't question that from Marc in any way. But that is very different than personal attacks. I agree. And certainly from our campaign or any other supposed independent group, we've been consistently having a positive message. Our TV ads are focused on my clear position on critical issues, on pushing back on Central Hudson that's been ripping off our community. And to that note, I've been really disappointed and kind of surprised at this attack ad that has started running on my TV, which is paid for both by the National Republicans and by Marc Molinaro, if you look at the bottom, that accuses me of, because I marched in a peaceful protest, which Marc was at, literally next to me, and invited me to, actually, in Poughkeepsie, that I somehow am some radical whatever mumbo jumbo they came up with. So Marc, I'd ask, actually, in the spirit of this discussion, if you would disavow and reject that negative ad, which is blasting people's TVs right now.
I appreciate the fact that in trying to suggest that we should all get along, you yet again attacked, and that is not my ad. It isn't. But Pat, you and I both know that we have a different view of public safety. We do. Do you support cashless bail as it exists today? Do you support the HALT Act as it exists today? Do you support the raise the age as it exists today? I have spent for the last decade. Dutchess County has perhaps the most sophisticated and progressive criminal justice infrastructure in the state. Because we invest in law enforcement, public safety, mental health, substance use, we dramatically reduced violent crime while ensuring everyone had the right of representation in court and the services they need to overcome the challenges they have. We protect victims. You and I disagree on this. I absolutely believe the system of justice needs to be fair to everyone, regardless of income, race, color, or creed. That is what I believe, and I believe then and believe now. But today, we are living with rampant crime. There is underreporting of criminal activity, and we have handcuffed law enforcement. You and I disagree on that. And therefore, I think that at the very least, you should acknowledge whether or not you side with those like the Working Families Party and others who truly believe that unfunding, defunding, and attacking law enforcement is the way in which to provide for public safety. I don't. I think there needs to be a comprehensive and smart community policing matched with investment in mental health, substance use, victim protection. And we've done it in my county. And I think I'd like to bring that to Washington as a message as well.
Marc, I'm going to follow up on that, because the things that you mentioned, the HALT Act, cashless bail, they're all New York issues, right? They're not federal issues. They're embedded in legislation that the Democrats in Washington have been trying to pass, and if given the opportunity, unfettered after November, will attempt to move forward with. They are embedded in federal legislation. Where do you stand on stricter gun controls? I mean, gun violence and particularly school shootings. I appreciate the pivot, but I do think, Pat, with all due respect, there should be some conversation. Does Pat Ryan? I'm going to go back to Pat. I'm going to go back to him with that. Yeah, I support the Second Amendment. I have my whole adult and public life. I believe, and by the way, Democrats in Washington and Albany have been in charge of just about everything, and New York State has the strictest gun laws in the country.
What I believe and will bring to Washington, D.C. on behalf of this district is a focus on what we can accomplish. What we can accomplish is effective investment in early intervention, trauma-informed care, and mental health services, not blindly. Those who have mental illness are almost unlikely to commit a crime. But those who do act violently against themselves or others, they have trauma in their lives that if we were to invest the infrastructure necessary, instead of casting people aside, invest them, we could prevent. Secondly, in the state of New York and around the country, but in the state of New York especially, individuals who commit crimes with guns, 65% are pled to non-gun related crimes. To me, in this country and in New York, if you commit a crime with a gun, then you should be prosecuted for a crime with a gun. Lastly, I think it is as importantly, we need comprehensive and effective background checks. In this country today, there's 1 million background checks that the FBI has yet to conduct. We have the infrastructure and the laws. We don't have the will to ensure that we have the resources necessary to drive down violence and protect people. At the end of the day, there is crime in our streets and in our communities. It occurs in our grocery stores, and we have to be clear. The people who commit crimes with guns, if you act out, ought to be held accountable. Democrats in Washington and Albany blame society before they're willing to hold the individual accountable. Lastly, and I think as importantly, we saw it in Albany. If we're going to react, we ought to do so in a responsible way. Albany just convened a special session to respond to what is clearly unconstitutional, arbitrary rules for the issuance of individual licenses all across the state, 62 separate rules, was matched by Albany now establishing more arbitrary rules, and may, in the effect, also made it impossible to hunt in the Catskills and in the Adirondacks because government reacted without thinking. And so I'm all for pushing for appropriate investment, and that's where I'm going to focus my time and resources.
Pat, bear with me for a second. Mark, you mentioned, and this seems to be a Republican sort of talking point, mental health.
No, I was very clear on that.
And needing to put more attention and more resources into mental health. It seems to me like to be an excuse, right? Oh, he had mental health issues.
No,
but not everybody does, right?
And I'm going to get agitated because you're putting words in my mouth. We know that individuals, in particular, young men who commit violence against themselves and others have trauma that if identified early enough, we can prevent. If we had effective background checks, like we ought to, we also could intervene at the right moment. This country, and my mother diagnosed depression. I know what mental illness looks like. In my county, for the last decade, we meet people where they are, we invest the help necessary, we prevent. And by the way, in the 8 years prior to cashless bail in Dutchess County, we were able to achieve a 50% reduction in violent crime and a 40% reduction in inmate population. Why? Because we invest and use the tools. Every law enforcement official in Dutchess, before they demanded it, trained in crisis intervention, trauma-informed care, social emotional training. Every school teacher, every administrator, mental health first aid, crisis intervention. $50 billion is all this country needs to ensure that everybody interacting with a young person has the ability and the training necessary to identify individuals who have trauma in their life and may in fact commit violence against themselves or others. I understand the desire to attack the weapon. I understand, but we also have to hold the people committing crimes accountable. This state, this nation, and I'm sorry, the Democrats in Albany and by extension, Washington, don't want to talk about that. I do.
Do you support universal background checks? You said comprehensive background checks.
You'd have to define what that means for every purchase of every weapon. I believe in comprehensive background checks. Well, Pat,
what does that mean to you?
That means if a background check is required, it has to be comprehensive and effective. But that's a decision left by the states. Unless Pat is saying background checks for every weapon, long gun, firearm, long gun or pistol in every state. Currently, that is a determination by states. And if we have a background check requirement, it needs to be comprehensive and effective.
Pat, you've repeatedly said that you don't believe, and you've used the phrase weapons of war belong in the hands of civilians. How do you reconcile your position on gun control with the Second Amendment and Supreme Court rulings? And also, what do you say to Marc's sort of comments about your position? So I'll give you an opportunity to respond, but I also want to know how you reconcile your position with what the Supreme Court and the Second Amendment sort of say clearly.
Rather than saying a lot of words, but very little, I will be very concise. Weapons of war, assault rifles, designed originally and perpetually to kill human beings en masse, to fire 5.56 millimeter rounds at high velocity that shred human flesh, and I've seen it myself, do not belong on our streets. We need an assault weapons ban, which, by the way, when we had it from 1994 to 2004, dramatically reduced by over 60% gun fatalities in our country. We need universal background checks. We need red flag laws. We need to close gun show loopholes, and we need to stop thinking that just because a piece of legislation doesn't address the whole problem, that it can address a significant part of the problem. As you pointed out, Patricia, the typical Republican talking points that Marc trumpets blame it just on mental health. And I agree. There is a toxic cocktail of underinvestment in mental health, which I've addressed as a county executive, putting weapons of war into those people's hands, and then radicalizing them with an ideology from a far right extremist rising segment of our country, of domestic terrorists, which have been essentially spurred on by our former president. And you bring that all together, and that's why we see what happened in Uvalde, which is absolutely horrific. People at a literal 4th of July parade being gunned down, a 2-year-old kid wandering around trying to find their parents who are both dead. And you think if that person didn't have that assault rifle, that 2-year-old would have lost their parents? Can you give me a break. It's clear to everybody. And once again, the Supreme Court is totally out of step with the American people on this issue and on women's reproductive rights and health.
Marc? No? Okay.
Although you did say you'd return to cashless bail.
Yes, I did say that. So let's talk a little bit about that, Pat. This bail reform has been an issue in some instances in New York State. There is a push to sort of bring that ideology to the federal level. Should people be evaluated, for example, and this is something that we never did in New York State, but should people be evaluated, for example, for dangerousness when bail is considered? Should we have cashless bail as sort of the matter of course, or as the norm, I guess is the word?
Yeah, and I'm gonna get to that, but I want to start by recognizing number one, that the responsibility for public safety for all elected officials is critical and central, and I very much understand that, going back to my days as an Army officer trained to understand how to provide safety and security. So every single thing I've done as county executive has been to further public safety. And I could go through a whole host of them, but I think most representative is a 20% increase to our Ulster County Urgent Task Force focused on violent crime and narcotics, resulting in the single biggest seizure of drugs and guns in Ulster County's history, of course, thanks to our sheriff and our great law enforcement partners. So I've consistently provided that additional resources and funding with real deliverable results. When it comes to the bail reform legislation, I've agreed with the governor's proposal that we do need to tweak that legislation and recognize that it was not working fully correctly, and that we should look at dangerousness and give additional discretion to judges. And I've been clear about that.
So join me right now in calling for a special session of the state legislature immediately. How many more victims do we need?
Marc, I think you've run for so many different offices so many times, you sometimes forget what we're doing here. This is not running for governor, which I know you've done. This is running for Congress. It's federal office. So the symbolic calls for things by the governor, that's not what we're doing here.
I do want to get to closing statements.
Well, excuse me, no, we were asked about cashless bail, so I'd like at least my 2 minutes to respond to the cashless bail issue. First of all, I do think it's important that a member of Congress cast away their party commitments and speak on behalf of the people he or she represents. Law enforcement in this state, and in particular in upstate New York, is being undermined consistently by cashless bail. and discovery reform. District attorneys can't even keep up with prosecution. You know that in your own county. And quite frankly, that massive drug bust, respectfully, was conducted in partnership with many, many communities. And I'm grateful for Sheriff Figueroa. I'm grateful for your partnership, but you also would be kind enough to acknowledge Sheriff Imperati in the Dutchess County Sheriff's Office role. We were both there. And I think it's important because law enforcement is a partnership. And what we've seen because of cashless bail is that individuals that ordinarily would find their way to the system who do deserve to have legal protection. Dutchess County expanded public defense to every court in our community. They deserve intervention. And Patricia, I would say not dangerousness. Dangerousness is a loaded a trigger word. It is a question of risk. Will an individual pose a risk to themselves or to others? And in Dutchess County, we launched a sophisticated measurement tool that I think should be used nationwide to evaluate that in every court in the country so that we ensure that people aren't treated based on the color of their skin or the amount of money they have in their bank accounts, but rather based on whether or not they're going to hurt themselves or someone else. And by the way, in my county, we diverted thousands of individuals from incarceration because it made sense to do so. We intervened with the right services, cashless bail, drug enhancement, drug services, drug treatment, employment opportunities, education, daycare. We intervened with all of those tools, and we were able to drastically and dramatically reduce violent crime. All of that was cast aside by cashless bail. And because of it, it is undermining our ability to provide for public safety. And so I just believe not only in speaking out, but using the resources. I want to leverage federal aid to invest in crisis intervention and trauma-informed care. I want to leverage federal aid to not have police departments beg for $3,500, but direct aid to ensure they have the tools and the resources to do their jobs. That is a distinguishable difference. And it's something that I will absolutely advocate for as a member of Congress.
Do you have anything to say?
Yeah, I mean, I think again, actions and outcomes really speak here. If you actually compare violent crime rates between Ulster and Dutchess, ours they're pretty close, but ours are lower. So I think there are multiple ways to get at this. A lot of what you just said, we've also implemented here.
Yes,
and I think we both agree that public safety is central. And I think we can talk about other things, but I'm happy to keep talking about this.
Well, we both get our minute, no?
Well, I mean,
you're comparing the current violent crime rates as a result of having an entire system cast out. And with respect, Dutchess was the only county in the state of New York to even implement and be able to implement the alternative to incarceration responsibility within cashless bail. And I respect and appreciate, and you know this, the work that you're doing in mental health. It is replicating what we have done for the last decade. And so with respect, what we tried to do over the course of the last 10 years is invest in the system. You haven't said that you would call for rescinding and replacing cashless bail. You haven't said that discovery is causing a real problem to prosecution. By the way, prosecution of all crimes. And so I just believe at this critical moment, we are seeing increased crime. We are seeing unreported crime, and we are seeing public safety undermined. It is important we say so. And it is important we push back even on our party and our party leaders to make clear that we cannot waste another day with a system of justice that is undermining public safety and harming and re-victimizing individuals.
Gentlemen, it is 3:05. I did have some other topics that I was hoping to get to, but I think we've had a pretty good debate and discussion on the topics that we have covered. Mark, I let you go first to deliver your opening statement. Pat, I'm going to let you make a closing statement first. So if you would, you have a couple of minutes to just wrap up and say what you would like to say.
Sure. Thank you again for doing this. Mark, thank you as well. Look, this is what I think democracy is about. Heated debate from people who care about our country and our community, have very strong differences, both in what we believe and also how we've carried out our service, but who respect each other and who actually just the other night, very late, worked together to help a mutual constituent with a really important issue. And I appreciate you taking my call at 11:30, Mark, and helping. So running for Congress is a a weighty and important responsibility at any moment, but right now in our country, I think it is more existential and urgent than certainly it's ever been in my lifetime. We have seen a clear and coordinated and growing, rising far-right extremist movement that is out of touch with the American population and the vast majority of Americans on critical issues like reproductive health and reproductive access to abortions, like voting rights, like gun safety. And we still didn't hear a clear answer on the view of one of the most seismic decisions ever in the Supreme Court, making it easier to put deadly weapons on the streets across the country. So we need someone who's going to stand up unequivocally, clearly, publicly on that and all issues. We need actual leadership, not the same boiled down talking points that we typically hear from folks that have been doing this for far too long. So I'm running to fight for this community that has had my back at every single step of my life. And really what I think the American people need and deserve right now are patriots who understand the existential nature of the threat to our democracy when you literally have other Americans storming our Capitol and willing to take away fundamental rights. And that's what I'm running to stand up for.
Thank you. Mark, last words?
During the pandemic, Washington and Albany decided that there were people that were not essential. Many of them lived with intellectual and developmental disabilities. We weren't instructed to simply ignore them. We were instructed to deny them aid. That is a truthful statement. A government that can turn its back on its most vulnerable is too big, it is too broken, and it is too arrogant. There are countless people who are suffering today. A government that's willing to cast aside those with disabilities and not provide them service, to send students home without any concern for how it is they'd retake those moments lost. A government that won't even ask whether or not the decision to put senior citizens in homes, knowing full well that the virus would take them. A government willing to do that without at least asking itself, can we do better? Which it isn't, is the same kind of arrogance that results in high inflation, high cost of living, and a irresponsible address of public safety. It is the same kind of government that ignores the communities of this district just as it has for generations. Republican and Democrat administrations in Washington and Albany have almost forgotten about the people who struggle on farms and small businesses throughout upstate New York. I haven't. And I think that we need a member of Congress who is going to hold them accountable. I believe you have an opportunity to send a message to Washington to say enough is enough. We need someone who's going to treat our tax dollars with respect, someone who's going to seek to hold Washington accountable, somebody who will speak out when the governor of New York says something that is so absurd and so ridiculous, despite sharing one's political party. I think that the next member of this Congress, next member of Congress for this district needs to be able to mold together consensus with people, Republicans and Democrats, which I've done my entire life, and work honestly and earnestly towards solving problems. It is too expensive because people don't care about your tax dollars. Government chooses to waste money without concern about how it might impact you. And we are living with a rise in crime because government won't address the fundamental responsibility of public safety. I will, just as I always have.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you both again for agreeing to this format.